So there's a day coming up in the not too distant future that a lot of people find to be very, very scary. And we're going to talk about that. The title of the talk today is Scary Things. And we're going to talk about that scary day coming up. And we're also talk about other things that we find to be scary. And of course, the scary thing that's coming up is the end of daylight saving time. And that's next Sunday, and this is where we're going to fall back. Now, the good news is we get an extra hour of sleep. The scary part is that people need to adjust their body clocks, and it's getting darker and darker, and we have to deal with that. And as the darkness comes upon us, that can be a scary thing. And I've mentioned a few times before the discussionment that's going on amongst the population about whether or not it makes sense to use daylight saving time, to change our clocks twice a year for something that's completely artificial, and that some people find to be completely disruptive. And I get it. I understand that time change is something that throws people's sleep schedule off and it makes things a little bit more uncomfortable, but I always like to go back to the fundamentals, to the basics, to the motivation and what happened to begin with in order to understand how we got to where we are. At New Thought Philadelphia, we love to celebrate the winter solstice, which is the shortest day of the year, the longest night of the year, which happens in December. By the way, we're going to be doing a winter solstice celebration on December 20th. It's a Friday evening, 7 to 8:30 p.m. Emily Drinker will be there doing music. The Board of Trustees is feverishly figuring out where there is going to be. It'll definitely be on Zoom. It'll be someplace else as well. It will not be at the Falzer Club, so the mystery is unfolding. But the interesting thing about the winter solstice is that in that 24-hour day, the winter solstice, the daytime is 5 hours and 41 minutes shorter than it is at the summer solstice, which we do not celebrate so much because we're all out playing in the sunshine. But we could. So 5 hours and 41 minutes out of 24 hours total. And what happens is daylight saving time isn't about having more daylight. It's about taking the time that we have, the 9 hours and 22 minutes of daylight versus 15 hours and 3 minutes of daylight, and when are we going to have that happen? Daylight saving time is about having our schedules arranged so that in the summertime, the sun doesn't come up at 4:30 in the morning and set at 8. It comes up at 5:30 in the morning and sets at 9. That's why the 4th of July fireworks often take as long as they do to get started, because it's light longer. So when we're saving daylight, we're not actually getting any more daylight. We're just adjusting our time schedule. And the fact of the matter is, people who say, well, it's just an artificial change in the time, the time of day is artificial as well. There is a moment when the sun is directly overhead for everybody, and that's noon. And half a day later, that's midnight. And it's different everywhere you are. And even across a time zone, it changes. There's an hour worth of change from the eastern edge of the time zone to the western edge of the time zone. So as we're making those assumptions about how we're going to conveniently describe when something is happening, which, by the way, is very helpful, especially on Zoom. If somebody's 3 minutes late for a Zoom meeting, you think that they're ghosting you, they're not going to show up. Can you imagine if we didn't have the time at all? And I think they should be here now, but I don't know. Do I stay here and wait or not? So on the one hand, I am empathetic to the people who are upset and their body clocks are thrown off by the time change. And on the other hand, I really don't want the sun coming up at 4:30 in the morning in the summertime. So there's a middle ground there. There's a way to understand what's going on. And I say that because when something is scary for us, if we just say that it's scary and it's bad and we put labels on it, we describe why we don't like it or why we do like it or why the people who think that it's a good idea are wrong, we miss the point. Oh yeah, scary things. Also coming up this week is Halloween, October 31st, which is when the children dress up either as their favorite cartoon characters or as something scary, as a vampire or a ghost or a goblin or fill in the blank, whatever the scary thing happens to be. And although that's the scary holiday, most people don't find Halloween to be particularly scary. It is a reminder of the darkness that's coming. It is a reminder that the days are getting shorter and the darkness is looming. And I think I have mentioned once or twice that Halloween is one of the cross-quarter days. It's halfway between the fall equinox, when day and night are the same length, and the solstice, which is when the day is the shortest and the night is the longest. Halloween happens to be halfway between. A couple of the other cross-quarter days are February 2nd, which we know as Groundhog Day, which is the one that feels like we're in the middle of the winter, and there's a slog now as we're hopefully getting towards spring. Another one is May 1st, which is May Day, where by then, even though it turned May in the end of March, it finally feels like springtime is coming. And so the cross-quarter days are the ones that we actually feel the seasons changing. So Halloween is where we feel the season changing and the dark is coming on. Those long nights are coming on. And that can cause us to have some fear. And to address it, to label it as something scary. Oh, and by the way, as I was talking to people about the talk, they said, oh yeah, Election Day is coming up on the 5th of November. Well, that's coming up too. And that's another scary thing for a lot of people. And it's scary because there's a lot at stake, and there's certainly been so much said and so much hand-wringing about this election, and it's all quite real. The stakes are actually very high. But as we deal with the fear that we're facing as we come into Election Day, I'm going to quote one of our presidents, Franklin Roosevelt, in his last inauguration. He said, "There is nothing to fear but fear itself." And what he was talking about is the fear of the unknown. When we don't know what's going on, it becomes much scarier. Our fear gets to imagine that the stuff that could happen has happened, and it's the worst possible version of it happening. And fear is actually an abbreviation, an acronym for false evidence assumed real. So we can take the input that we've got, we can assume that it's got some power, we can assume that it's real, and then we can have an emotional reaction to that, and game on. And it's not like the stuff that we're afraid of isn't real. There's an adequate reason to be afraid of sharks because they're big and they have teeth and they have been known to bite people, and we do not wish to be one of the people bitten by a shark. When I started scuba diving 30 years ago, there was, of course, the fear of all of the sharks that might be in the water. And the fear that as soon as I dip my toe into the Atlantic Ocean, a shark is going to come right after me. And it turns out, and I've worked through the fear on that one. And of course, the people who had been scuba diving for a long time when I was a beginner said, yeah, it's not the real thing to worry about. And eventually you'll be looking for sharks. And I couldn't imagine that that was going to happen. And then when I eventually did see a shark, I said, oh, look, cool, shark. And sometimes we would follow the sharks to see what they were doing because they were interesting and they were not interested in us. Especially not interested in me down underwater with a tank and lots of air bubbles, which the sharks are really not used to. So you want to talk about fear and false evidence assumed real. There's this scary thing coming toward me that's about the size I am. It's time to go in the opposite direction. And they take advantage of the fact that they can swim very quickly. The third letter in there is assumed. And if we remember back to Don Miguel Ruiz and the 4 agreements, the third agreement is don't make assumptions. And if fear is false evidence assumed real, we are violating the third agreement when we assume that whatever it is that we are finding to be scary has some power to it. And the advice in response to that, how do we deal with something that we're afraid of? How do we deal with scary things? How do we deal with something that came along that doesn't fit into the model that we have of how we would like things to be? Well, run toward it. There's something scary over there. Instead of running away from it and giving it that much more power as you let it disappear into the shadows, shine the light on it, go over toward it and say, what is this? What exactly is this? What's going on here? Because by bringing whatever it is that we're afraid of into the light, by taking the things that we find to be scary and shining a light on them, it turns out to just be a kid in a costume. Or it turns out to be the requirement to change the clocks, not because we want it to be dark earlier in the afternoon, but because we don't want the elementary school kids standing on the bus stop at 8:30 in the morning in the pitch dark. Yeah, we did that when I was in school. My younger brother was in elementary school, and it was 1970 something. We had no daylight saving time, or we let it go all year long, and it was awful. was supposed to be a 2-year experiment. They ended it after the first year. So proving, of course, that we can learn from our mistakes, let's consider doing that again now, because times change. But shine the light on it. Look at it from all sides. See what that could mean. See what it could mean to you. And as far as the election is concerned, there's fear in lots of different dimensions in the election. And in the presidential election, the fears, our fears are being stoked by everybody. On one side is the fear of what will happen if you don't vote for that particular candidate. How horrible this country is going to be. How many demonic, dastardly, negative things are going to happen if you don't let this person come in and save us all. And the people on the other side have a huge fear about what could happen to our democracy if you do vote for that candidate. So it's all about fear. It is all about fear. And it's real. There's a lot of it going on. There's a lot of tumult that's in the air. And for me, it brings up the question, when we shine the light on that, what does it look like? And as I've been pondering this over the course of the last week or so, it occurs to me that New Thought, and specifically religious science, which is the branch of New Thought that I was trained in and that New Thought Philadelphia is based in, that's what democracy is. Back in the days of our founding fathers, nobody had ever had a democracy where the entire country was run by the people. And they were able to look at the monarchy that was remote controlling us from overseas. And as Ernest Holmes pointed out in the textbook 100 and something years later, look a fact in the face and know something better. So looking at the situation and the circumstances and say, what could be? What is the next thing that is possible? And the reason that I say that democracy is an outpicturing, an example of New Thought, is because it's all based on our common belief that we, the people, can work together to create a more perfect union. Acknowledging that it's not perfect, acknowledging that it can be better, and then looking at the circumstance and the situation that we have right now and say, what can make this better? How can we help each other to become better? How can we uplift each other to become better? How can we make space for each of us to live the life that is possible for us, to bring in more of that love and more of that joy, more of that good that we're all seeking? So we've been part of the 100 Days election intention, and it's getting down to the wire. It's a daily practice of suggestions about techniques that we can use to take ourselves emotionally and spiritually beyond the fear of the divisiveness that it's going to be this way or that way, and how do we let love into the situation? And that becomes a collective decision for all of us as we the people, and it all starts with me. What am I doing? How am I participating in making this a better place for me and for my family and for my countrymen and my fellow citizens and my children and their children and everybody else to live? What will make this democracy better and stronger? What will uplift people, not necessarily for tomorrow, what's in my best interest for right now, but what is going to make this better for everybody? And one of the sad things is that the facts that are in the world around us don't necessarily conform to our beliefs. Every once in a while we speak for myself. Every once in a while I believe something and then a fact comes along and says, nope, that's not the case. There's either something else to be known or something that I didn't know or something that didn't get included in the calculations, and it changes it. And when something like that happens, we have that invitation, that urging, that requirement to change our beliefs. And can we change our beliefs? Yeah. Yeah, this entire teaching, the entire process is based on the ability to change your belief, change your thinking, and thereby change your life. Because the life that we are living is the outpicturing of our beliefs. And that's a good news, bad news thing. It's like if people say, well, I'm to blame. You think the horrible way my life is going because I'm to blame for what I believe. Well, I'm not using the word blame. Yeah. If your life is the result of everything you've believed and you don't like the way your life looks, then it's a pretty good indication that This is a nice time to go change your beliefs. Go look at what you believe and see if there's room for something different in there. We can change our belief. And by the way, the process of examining our beliefs and changing them and inviting in a different experience of life, there's a shorthand word for that. It's called healing. Healing is not fixing the outside stuff. Healing is revealing the truth behind it all. Is there a possibility for love to be unfolding in this particular situation? Is it possible? Is it possible for me to go dive into the ocean with scuba tanks on and not be immediately attacked by a shark? Well, by golly, it turns out that is possible. Is it possible for us to not just survive, but thrive? To take the challenges that are coming up in this election season and use that to define who it is that we want to be? Not next year, not for the next 4 years, but for the 4 years after that, and the 4 years after that, and the 40 and 400 years after that. We're at a turning point. We always have the opportunity. And by putting down whatever it is that we're afraid of, by dismissing the fears, by saying, yeah, there's some truth to that, but that's not the entire extent of the truth, we let go of that false evidence assumed real. We get to do, as Don Miguel Ruiz suggested, and not make assumptions, and open ourselves up to something wonderful and possible. And when the light is shining, when the love is unfolding, when the good is flowing, when the healing is revealing, it's not scary. We take that bright light of love into the dark places, into those shadowy corners, into the nooks and crannies, into the inky shadows. And suddenly they're not dark corners or inky shadows anymore. Suddenly they're just turns and twists and new opportunities along the path. And the great thing is that we are always at choice. We do not necessarily have to give power to the stuff just because it's there. We can give our attention and our energy and our love and our enthusiasm and our commitment to the good that we are desiring to invite into our world. And we all get to do that. So that is the invitation for this very, very scary week as we come up on Halloween and Standard Time and the election and the dark season beyond. Dark in terms of the nights are going to be longer, not in terms of impending doom. As we engage in this season, be that bright light of love. Let that light shine through and as you, and see what happens as it reflects on the world around you. You deserve to see that light. You deserve to recognize that you are that light. Be it and be love, because you're wonderful. And so it is. Thank you.